What if Nick from the Left 4 Dead 2 universe was a fugitive? How would that impact the story, and what exactly about him would change? That is what we're going to be talking about in today's episode of Left 4 Dead 2 What If. For those that have not seen an episode within the series before, this is a Left 4 Dead version of Disney's What If series with the Marvel Universe. So basically what we would do is we would take a element or a storyline piece from Left 4 Dead and put a twist on it just to see what exactly would happen if one little tweak ended up being in the game. Now for those that don't know, back when Left 4 Dead 2 was first being developed, when they were making all the different characters for the second game, Nick's origin story was going to end up being different, where he actually was going to end up being a convict or a fugitive. Because we all know about Nick's background, about how that he's basically a gambler and kind of like that stereotypical bad boy and gets into a lot of trouble. Well, originally they wanted to go as far as him being in jail. Now, since the idea of him being a criminal was scrapped before the game launched, we can only speculate about how his story was supposed to end up being different from the way it is now. Throughout this episode, I would like to describe my version of a slightly different retelling of Left 4 Dead's story arc with Nick, and basically talk about what I think would end up happening within the Left 4 Dead universe if Nick's identity, his true identity, really got revealed. So let's talk about this. So if Nick was really a criminal and a fugitive, I think that the best thing for his character arc would be to have it be a slow burn, because if you really think about it, Nick's current story arc is really solid. I don't think they would need to change it that much, but what they should do is that you could end up having it where over time, from the 5 maps that we have, from Dead Center all the way up until the Parish campaign, every single one of the characters should end up putting pieces of a puzzle together and realize by the final map who Nick really is. And you can end up having an ultimatum where there's character dialogue about the possibility of not keeping him in the group. But how would you end up doing that successfully over the course of 5 maps? At the very beginning of Dead Center, we end up having it where within the elevator, all the characters are trying to get to know each other, and I think it'd be kind of cool given Rochelle's history, and this would even be great dialogue for Rochelle because it would make her character more interesting since she doesn't really talk that much or have very compelling voice lines. What you could end up doing is that when all the characters are introducing themselves, you could have Ellis and Coach and Rochelle go first, but by the time that they end up getting to Nick, Nick could be on the little bit more hesitant side. And what he can end up doing is he could try to like shrug it off and not make it a big deal, being like, you don't need to know my name, or just say I'm Nick. And Rochelle could have something as simple of a voice line as being like, wait, don't I know your face from somewhere? And then just leave it at that. End up making it so that way all the other characters, like Ellis and Coach, are like, what? And then the zombies attack, and so they can't really focus on what they last heard, but it's just something that's a seed that plants in the back of their mind. This would be a long strung out process of major foreshadowing at the very beginning of the game all the way to the very end. Then you can end up having it where that throughout Dead Center, basically what happens is that every single safe room, Ellis and Coach keep wanting to know more and keep bringing back up the conversation again. And Rochelle talks about some stuff about how like, oh, I was a news reporter, I did this, and I remember seeing your face somewhere, but because of the stress of the apocalypse and the heat of the moment, the fact that she keeps getting interrupted, she just can't quite remember where she's seen his face. Then what you could end up having is where in Dark Carnival, since the carnival setting has probably tons and tons of stuff littered throughout it, since it was a big attraction before it inevitably got ruined by the apocalypse, you could have it where personal belongings are scattered across the place, which would trigger survivor dialogue. You could end up having like wedding rings, you can end up having wallets, and most importantly, what I'm going to give an example of is newspaper, because what you can end up having is that you can end up having a ripped piece of a newspaper that once again shows Nick's face. And the dialogue can end up triggering this question that Rochelle ends up pressing even further from the prior map. But because the newspaper is ripped and there's going to be no words attached to it and she can't find the other pieces, she can only just simply go as far as just saying, I know you and other people know you, but I'm going to get to the bottom of this. Now we end up moving on to Swamp Fever, and you can end up having it where that the characters over time have started to slowly get to know each other, and even though Rochelle has been hesitant and almost careful around Nick, she just by proxy gets used to him. So things have started to die down just a little bit, but Rochelle is definitely still suspicious, and because of how suspicious she has been, she has raised the suspicions of both also Ellis and Coach. But what all three of them do is that they decide to start keeping it more toward themselves now because they realize that Nick is not going to speak, so they can only end up calling him out really at this point if they have ironclad proof. So it's just something that they're thinking about. You could end up having it where with Swamp Fever, there's nothing that is promoting the dialogue until at the very end of the map where you're at the plantation house. And what you can end up having is that Virgil on the radio, if you end up having where Nick picks up the radio and ends up hearing his voice, Virgil can say, hey, I know your voice from somewhere. But here's the catch, is that even though Virgil recognizes his voice, he doesn't remember why he recognizes his voice. We're just going to say, for the sake of the story, that since Virgil is on the older side and probably would end up having some sort of early Alzheimer's, although not severely, but just, by being old, your memory's not as good, and with the stress of the apocalypse, it'd be very hard to focus. Let's just say that Virgil can only go as far as recognizing Nick, but not remember why. Now at this point, the survivors are all going to be looking at Nick. Now they know that he's not going to end up spilling the beans, but they know that there's something going on, and it only just keeps inevitably getting more and more serious. The survivors know something's up, and they can only assume that since Nick won't say anything, that must be pretty bad. So because Nick won't say anything, and they know that he won't say anything so badly, it can only be bad, the survivors probably will end up making it worse in their head than it actually is. And the one that's the most concerned about this is Rochelle, given the fact that she's a news reporter, and she's really good at sniffing these types of things out, so she wants to make sure that Nick is not going to end up being an evil person and hurting the group. Now over time, since in the Left 4 Dead campaigns, once we get to the point of Swamp Fever, we get to end up being accompanied by Virgil, even in Hard Rain and the very beginning of the parish, and what will happen is that over the time that we are on the boat and we're talking to Virgil, Virgil will kind of be like our guide to put pieces of the puzzle together. Rochelle especially will end up asking Virgil probably several questions about being like, hey, can you tell me about Nick? Why do you recognize his voice? What exactly is going on here? Now, even though Nick is confident that he won't end up getting caught, he does have it in the back of his mind that snooping would probably not be the best thing. So he tries to get involved and distract Virgil, try to keep him away from Rochelle, try to just keep everyone separate from each other and just mostly focus on pure survival. So, since in Hard Rain, inevitably, we have to, in the story, get gas for Virgil's boat, Nick can use this as an excuse to say like, hey, you know what, instead of talking about this thing that I insist you don't talk about for the last several maps now, let's just get gas, so that way we can end up focusing on something else. This could be Nick's way of diffusing the situation. And now we reach our conclusion with this made-up story, where we end up getting to the Parish campaign. So what would end up being the thing that would allow Rochelle to finally figure out truly who Nick is? And you can end up having it be with the military. You can end up making it so that way in the situation where they're finally at their bridge and they need to end up going to the military, Nick can end up being hesitant. Now, Nick, by default, is already hesitant and really suspicious about the military. He truly does believe that if they end up going to seek them as rescue, that they will inevitably get lined up against a wall and killed, and so he has to end up making a tough decision. Even though Rochelle has not managed to find out his identity, or at least not yet, he knows that there is a very high likelihood that the military will find it out. And since Nick, in his criminal story here that we're going to make up, probably ends up having it where he did a lot of bad things, the military would not only recognize him, but if he wasn't arrested, he could also end up being killed. But even though he could end up being killed, he's grown attached to the survivors. Even though he doesn't exactly inherently like anybody, he can't help but by proxy like and respect to a certain degree his fellow teammates. And since he ends up being super suspicious throughout the entire campaign of the military and their actions, seeing all the dead humans that were riddled with bullets and not infected, he believes that regardless of who it is that sees the military, whoever crosses that bridge is dead. So Nick decides to end up revealing to the entire group who he really is. Via dialogue in great and utter detail, before they end up activating the bridge, Nick will talk about everything. He will talk about how that he is a convict. He will talk about exactly what he did and why he believes that because of his past experience, that going with the military would be a bad idea. And because of this, the Left 4 Dead 2 survivors with Rochelle, Coach, and Ellis, now they have to make a choice. They have to decide if whether or not that Nick should be allowed to end up going with them or have the possibility of dying alone. Because in their mind, what they're thinking is being like, okay, if Nick is a criminal and he's done all these horrible things, and supposedly, because within the Left 4 Dead universe, Nick possibly has also done murder, they don't want to end up having it where that they think that Nick is going to end up backstabbing them. But also at the same time, but because they've survived so long at this point with him, they can't help but feel that if Nick was going to really do something bad, he would have done it by now. And here's the thing, is that Ellis, Rochelle, and Coach have all seen the exact things that Nick has seen, with all the dead bodies and all the evidence pointing to the suspicions that the military really might actually be bad people. They can't help but believe that Nick is right. So, even though the dialogue would make it seem at first that they're not definitively going to agree with Nick at the end, they do end up agreeing with Nick, and they decide that, hey, they're going to stick together, but the one difference is that they're still going to go to the military anyway. The reason why they decide to do this is because in their minds, they are definitely dead if they decide to stay because the military are going to do their bombings no matter what. So what they are going to do is that they're going to be doing a long-term plan where they're going to have Nick keep his mouth shut in the hopes that they do not recognize him and do not end up looking into it, and they just go to the military and try to survive until they can end up going away on their own. So at the end, they end up getting to the military helicopter as usual, and then they end up going with them. Now, I could continue the story beyond this point, but I don't want to necessarily make this too long of a video, so I'm going to end it there. But I think that would be a really nice touch on how you can end up implementing Nick's criminal history and making him a convict within the story while still end up keeping the current Nick story arc. Because Nick's story arc already by default, even though I don't inherently like Nick's personality type, it's still a good story arc. So what you can end up doing is have it be like a mystery, make it so that way Rochelle is involved, and have it where Rochelle is also a compelling character and boost her up a bit. And I think that overall, if you were end up kind of having like this clue type of mystery going throughout the entire series, that would end up being really cool for dialogue, and not only dialogue, but also for character development. Hell, I'll even throw you one more bonus that I randomly just thought of. You can even have it where in the passing campaign that because of Francis being a biker guy and having his own criminal history, you can end up having it where that Nick is involved. Because if you end up having it where Nick is involved with Francis, there could even be some dialogue amongst both groups. Because there's also some Left 4 Dead storyline stuff about how that people think that Francis and Nick have already met each other via their prior gangs. There's a lot of different Left 4 Dead dialogue that we could do here, and there definitely is substance to this. But at the end of the day, it really is just a theory and what we decide to put into it. But I do hope you guys end up enjoying today's episode of Left 4 Dead 2 What If. If you guys end up enjoying today's video, please end up dropping a like, comment, subscribe, follow, and all that beautiful stuff. If you guys would like to financially support the channel, I would tremendously appreciate if you guys could go check out my Patreon. It's always linked down below in all my YouTube video descriptions. Or you guys could use supporter creator code BlackNinja797 in all caps any Fortnite Big Games item shops, because Epic is my very first sponsor and they're sponsoring today's video. So shout out to Epic Games. But yeah, guys, I hope you end up enjoying seeing another YouTube video from the most unique YouTubers you're ever going to see. Thank you for watching, guys. I love all of you, and peace out.
Hey, meme lords. Jesus here. And you better have enjoyed that video there by the eternal god Daddy Ninja. You should probably subscribe too, or the mighty Moab will come for your balls. If you enjoyed the video, you might like it too. And give me the memes. Flash, bang, boom!